Hello and welcome everyone to the Data Structure and Algorithm series. This is the second lecture of the Data Structure and Algorithm series in which we are going to cover about vectors. We also call it dynamic arrays. If you haven't gone through the arrays lecture, I would recommend you to please go through the link you will find above. So, what are vectors? Vectors are basically a type of array in which the size is not fixed. We have seen in arrays lecture that whenever we define array, we have to explicitly mention the exact size of the array which we are going to need. But in some cases, what happens, we do not want or we do not know the exact size which we are going to need. And in those cases, if we implement arrays, it creates some issues. So let us come and see the implementation of vector. In C++, vectors, we have to mention vector, then inside the brackets we need to mention the data type. Say we are using integers here as our example, and then we need to give it a name. So the name here, say we have given a name of v. So by this way we have created our vector, and it will allocate some memory for vector. So how it will know what size it needs to mention? There is a concept behind this. For better understanding, let us know. Take an example that initially it is like vector always create an array of size 2. So what happens here is whenever we have defined a vector, we dynamically allocate data to it. So say we have allocated 2 and 4 to the vector v. Now we want to add another value or another integer of size or integer say 5. But here you can see, as the initial vector was only of size 2, the size is a predefined size in the STL library for the vectors. So it can be anything. I am not familiar with the exact size. Let us take it as 2. So what is happening here? When the array of size 2 is completely full and we need to add another data, what it will happen, that it will multiply the size, current size, which is 2. It is the current size with 2. I mean, it will twice the exact size of the array. So now it will create an array of size 4 here. Now what will happen, as the size of 4 array has been created, it will copy all the data which was present in our initial array. So 2 and 4 will be copied here, and now this vector will become v, or this array will become our v vector. Now the 5 which we were adding to this array, as it was outbounding it, now we have the available place for it. So here it will get added and 5 will get passed here. In the similar fashion, whenever we are full with our size, vector internally does the task of multiplying the current memory or the current array size and doubles it and create another vector or another array of the double size, and then copies all the data. Here this operation is not an operation that is required every time. This operation only is required whenever whenever our array is completely full, and that's why the amortized time for this operation is also of order of 1. So this, we can say, an array of fixed size combined with multiplying functionality together forms vector. So vector is nothing, just another way of implementation of array in which we increase the size of the array and copy the data to it. So by this way, vector comes out handy as whenever we need to add data, this functionality will be implemented internally, and what happened that it will multiply itself and increase the size. So this will work similarly to a dynamic array. This is the concept behind the vectors. Hopefully you guys understood what a vector looks like and how it is implemented. Let us, for a better understanding, take an example and go through it. So let us take v as our initial vector, which contains 4 data, 4, 2, 1 and 8. 4 integers, 4, 2, 1 and 8. Now to add or remove data, for vectors in C++, there is a simple function that is pushback, that is an HTL function of HTL library for vectors. We can also create our own vector data type. We will do it in our next implementation lecture for arrays and vectors. In that, we will create our own vector without using HTL library. So pushback functionality can also be understood as simply an add back functionality which will add the data at the end. So whenever we push back any value, 4218 was initially present and the array was full. Now if we want to v.push back another integer is 100. So now what happens? First step it will do, it will create the size here is 4. So it will create an array of size equal to 8. Now as the size of the array has been doubled, this array will be kept as temporary. Now all the data from our initial array will be copied with a loop function, 4, then 2, then 1, then 8. Now we have an array of double the size and a value and vacant spaces for adding more data. Now this temp will be given to v, that is v is now temp. So basically what is happening is that data type, that v vector which it was pointing initially to this so v vector was initially pointing here 4 to 1 and 5 4 to 1 and 8. What happened after this step, vtemp, it will this v vector will point now to the head of the new vector or new array which is of double the size, and this way vector v is now a dynamic vector which can add more data. Now as we were doing is pushing back 100, so all this step was done just for this one addition, this pushback function of 100, because the array was full. Now 100 will be pushed here. Now for next 3 steps, next 3 pushback functions or add functions, we are having spaces, so we do not need to double the size or do the same functionality here. Now for the next 3 pushbacks, it will simply do the operations in order of one time, and thus how for total of 4 steps, time needed for this was order of n was initially 4, and for this other 3 it was order of 1. When the whole calculation is done, the amortized time comes out to be 1. order of 1, because this O of n operation we are not doing every time. We only need to do whenever the data structure is full. Hopefully, this information was sufficient enough to understand vectors. Keep in mind the multiplication functionality which we have discussed about the vectors. It is a very important concept for interviews. In the next video, we are going to do hands-on on vectors and array. Thank you and keep learning.